The sun shone through the tall windows of the vast mansion, illuminating the corridors decorated with elegant furniture and family portraits. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and pancakes wafted through the house, heralding the start of another ordinary and happy day for Sarah. The 8-year-old girl rushed down the stairs, her golden hair still tousled from sleep, but a smile lighting up her childlike face. The scent of her favorite food guided her straight to the kitchen, where she found her mother, Carol, gracefully moving between the stove and the table, setting out plates for breakfast. "Good morning, sleepyhead." Carol smiled, pulling Sarah into a tight hug. The girl laughed, nuzzling into her mother's lap for a few moments before sitting at the table. The sight of the carefully set table brought her a sense of comfort. Fluffy pancakes drizzled with syrup, fresh orange juice, and a plate of scrambled eggs, just the way she liked them. James, her father, entered the kitchen next, already dressed in an impeccable suit, but with his tie still loose around his neck. He was a busy man, owner of a renowned restaurant chain, but he always made sure to share mornings with his family before leaving for work. Sarah watched as he grabbed a cup of coffee and left a quick kiss on Carol's forehead before sitting down beside his daughter. "So, Princess, ready for another day at school?" James asked, taking a sip of coffee while giving Sarah a playful look. "Yes, but only because Mommy said she'll take me to pick out a new dress later," the girl replied enthusiastically, her eyes shining with the promise of the outing. Carol laughed, sitting down at the table beside them. "You're growing up so fast, my little one. Soon you'll be picking out your own dresses without my help." Sarah frowned, shaking her head. "Never. You always have the best taste." James watched the two with a discreet smile, satisfied with the harmony of the moment. Despite the hectic routine and demands of work, nothing mattered more to him than these family mornings. He knew that Carol was the heart of their home, the woman who kept everything running smoothly and filled Sarah's days with love and affection. After breakfast, Sarah ran upstairs to change clothes while Carol cleared the plates and James finished getting ready. The atmosphere was tranquil. The house exuded a welcoming energy. Their life was happy, stable, filled with little moments that made each day special. On the way to school, Carol drove while Sarah animatedly recounted an art project she was working on. Her mother listened attentively, laughing at the exaggerated descriptions and encouraging her daughter's creativity. It was their custom. Carol always made sure to take Sarah to school, seizing these moments alone to strengthen the bond between them. "When you get back, we can stop by the store to pick out your dress, and then we can get some ice cream." "What do you think?" Carol suggested, glancing in the rearview mirror and seeing her daughter's face light up. "Yes, I want strawberry with chocolate." "Then it's a deal." When they arrived at school, Sarah got out of the car with her pink backpack and ran to join her friends waiting in the schoolyard. Before disappearing among the children, she turned to wave one last time at her mother, who smiled and blew a kiss into the air. The day proceeded normally, with no shadow of what was to come. James spent the morning in important meetings, ensuring the businesses continued to prosper, while Carol organized household commitments and planned a special weekend for the family. Sarah, meanwhile, had fun at school, surrounded by friends and concerned only with what color dress she would choose that afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Carol parked the car in front of the school, just as she did every day. Sarah appeared running, her hair streaming behind her, carrying a sheet of paper scribbled with a drawing she had made. "Look, Mommy, I drew our family." The girl held out the paper, proud of her colorful work of art. Carol took the drawing and smiled at the childlike depiction of herself, James, and Sarah, all holding hands under a big yellow sun. Her heart warmed. "It's beautiful, my love. I'll put it on the fridge as soon as we get home." Sarah beamed, satisfied. The drive to the mall was filled with lively conversations about school, a new book Carol had bought for her daughter, and what dress they would choose. They spent an hour trying on clothes, laughing together, until finally Sarah picked a light blue dress, covered in ruffles, that made her feel like a princess. Carol paid for the purchase and, keeping her promise, took her daughter for ice cream. It was a perfect afternoon. The two sat at a small outdoor table, while Sarah licked her ice cream cone and told stories about what she wanted to be when she grew up. "Maybe I'll be an artist, or a restaurant owner like Daddy. But I also want to be a princess. You can be whatever you want, my little one." Carol brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face and smiled. Sarah returned the smile, unaware that this day would forever be etched in her memory. The last day when everything was still perfect. Night had already fallen when Carol left the restaurant, bidding goodbye to the staff with a gentle smile. Dinner had been a success, and she was excited to get home and tell Sarah about the surprise she had planned for the weekend. As she walked across the parking lot, unlocking the car with a quick click, her phone rang. It was James. "It's late, love. Should I ask one of the drivers to take you?" His voice was laden with concern, and Carol smiled as she got into the car, fastening her seatbelt. "Don't worry, dear, it's all right. Traffic is quiet and I'll be home in less than 30 minutes, she replied, starting the engine. James sighed on the other end of the line, still hesitant. He always worried when Carol drove late at night, but he knew she enjoyed the sense of independence. "Okay, but let me know when you get home. Sarah's already asleep, but I bet she'll bombard you with questions about the new dress first thing tomorrow." Carol laughed, already picturing the scene. "I can't wait. See you soon." The car glided smoothly through the illuminated streets, and Carol kept her gaze focused on the road. The city was quieter now, and the traffic was light. The radio played a soft melody, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax, thinking about her sleeping daughter at home and how perfect life seemed. But then, it all happened too fast. The headlights suddenly appeared in her line of sight, and a violent impact threw her against the steering wheel. The sound of twisted metal and shattering glass filled the air, and a scream caught in her throat. The world spun in disarray, the car spinning on the road before slamming forcefully into a pole. Pain exploded in her chest, her breathing became erratic, and darkness began to take over. James was sitting in the living room, going over some restaurant documents when the phone rang. He found the timing odd but answered without a second thought. The voice of the hospital attendant on the other end was like a punch to the gut, and for a moment he thought he had misunderstood. "Sir, your wife has been in an accident. She was brought to the hospital in critical condition. We need you to come immediately." The phone dropped from his hand before he could respond, and a chilling cold swept through his body. Sarah was asleep upstairs, oblivious to the nightmare that had just begun. James grabbed the car keys and rushed out, his heart pounding in his chest. The hospital was immersed in the frantic rhythm of the emergency room when he arrived. White lights and bustling corridors blurred past as he ran to the reception desk. "Carol Gibbons, my wife, where is she?" His voice came out loud and trembling, his wide eyes fixed on the nurse checking a monitor. "She's in surgery. The impact was severe, and the doctors are trying to stabilize her," the woman replied, her professional demeanor concealing any hint of hope or pessimism. James felt his legs weaken, leaning against the counter. His mind refused to accept what was happening. Just hours earlier, Carol had been laughing, planning the weekend with their daughter. Now she was fighting for her life in a cold, sterile room, separated from him by heavy, impersonal doors. Time seemed to drag cruelly. He sat in one of the waiting room chairs, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, and each passing minute without news was a silent torture. When the doctor finally appeared, James jumped up, his desperate gaze searching the man's tired expression for any clues. "Mr. Gibbons, your wife suffered severe trauma. The impact caused extensive internal damage. We did everything we could, but..." The pause was long enough for James to feel the ground disappear beneath his feet. Unfortunately, she didn't make it. For an instant, everything fell silent. The world seemed to have stopped turning. James's chest constricted with a suffocating pain, and his mouth opened but no sound came out. No, that can't be right. She said she was okay. I spoke to her a little while ago." Denial came first, followed by an overwhelming despair. The doctor lowered his head, expressing condolences. "I'm so sorry, sir. We did everything we could." James stumbled backward, reality crushing him with an unbearable weight. The hospital, the lights, the sounds around him, it all became distant, irrelevant. His Carol, his wife, the woman he had built a life with, was gone. By the time he left the hospital, his hands were trembling and his face was pale. He felt unable to breathe, as if the air had become too thick to pass through his lungs. But the worst was yet to come. When he arrived home, he found the babysitter sitting on the living room couch, looking at him with concern. Sarah was still asleep, unaware that when she woke up, her life would never be the same again. James climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort to remain standing. When he opened his daughter's bedroom door, he found Sarah curled up under the covers, her breathing peaceful, clutching one of the stuffed animals Carol had bought her months before. He stood there for a moment, observing the scene, feeling the unbearable weight of the pain that would soon fall upon his little girl. How could he look into her eyes and say that her mother would never come back? The sob came without warning, a hoarse and broken sound that echoed through the silent room. He sat on the edge of the bed and ran his hand through his daughter's hair, feeling more fragile than ever. Sarah stirred slightly, her eyes blinking with sleep as she sensed her father's presence. "Daddy?" Her voice was soft, still laden with drowsiness. James tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but failed miserably. "Hi, Princess. I need to tell you something." Sarah sat up slowly, sensing the different tone in her father's voice. Her childish heart caught something wrong even before the words came out. "What happened?" she asked, frowning. James tried to keep his composure, but his watery eyes betrayed his pain. He held his daughter's little hands in his own, feeling the childish warmth contrasting with the coldness of the morning that consumed him. "Mommy had an accident, my love." His voice faltered, and he had to take a deep breath before continuing. "She couldn't make it back home." Sarah blinked a few times, trying to process the words. But she said she was coming back." James closed his eyes for a moment, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. "I know, dear, I know." The crying came next, the despair of a girl who lost her greatest reference, the tight hug she sought in her father's chest, in an attempt to find safety in a world that had suddenly become frightening. And it was on that night, amid tears and sobs, that little Sarah's life changed forever. The sky was grey, and a cold breeze cut through the air as the last words were said beside the coffin. The muffled sound of dirt being thrown onto the wood was the only noise besides the stifled sobs of the few people present. Sarah remained motionless beside her father, her tiny fingers gripping the hem of his coat tightly, as if that could prevent reality from swallowing her. She wasn't crying. Since receiving the news, she hadn't shed a single tear. She refused to believe it. Her mother couldn't be there in that dark coffin, separated from her forever. James stood upright beside his daughter, his face rigid, his features hardened by the pain he refused to show. Since the accident, something inside him had been irreversibly broken. He lost his words, lost the will to face the people who came to offer him empty condolences. All he could do was hold his daughter's hand, the only link that kept him standing. The priest concluded the ceremony, and little by little those present began to disperse. But Sarah didn't move. "Let's go, Princess," James said softly, trying to gently pull her by the arm. But Sarah remained there, her eyes fixed on the newly placed headstone, as if she waited a little longer, her mother might simply open her eyes and smile at her. "She'll come back," she murmured, her voice weak, almost inaudible. James closed his eyes for an instant, trying to maintain control. His daughter's pain was a reflection of his own, but he didn't know how to help her. He didn't even know how to help himself. "Sarah." He crouched down to her level, firmly holding her shoulders. "I know it hurts, but Mommy can't come back." "She promised she'd come back home," the girl insisted, her voice trembling with frustration and despair. James felt his chest tighten, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. How to explain to a child that some promises are impossible to keep? The rain began to fall in fine drops, and James finally managed to get Sarah away from there, carrying her in his arms as she hid her face on his shoulder. There were no more words, only the heavy silence that enveloped them as he took her home to a place that now seemed too empty. In the days that followed, the house became merely a space filled with absences. The scent of Carol's perfume still lingered in the air, mingled with memories that seemed to spread through every corner. Sarah spent hours sitting at the bedroom window, staring at the entrance to the house, waiting, praying, for her mother to appear there with a smile and say that it had all been a terrible mistake. James, unable to bear the weight of grief, drowned himself in work. He left the house before Sarah woke up and returned when she was already in bed. The household staff tried to fill the void, but their presence made no difference. Breakfast became a solitary meal for Sarah, who spent her days immersed in a disturbing silence. In the first week, she waited for her mother. In the second, She began calling for her in the hallways. In the third, she understood that no one would answer. James, for his part, avoided spending too much time at home. He immersed himself in endless meetings, reviewed contracts he already knew by heart, anything to keep his mind occupied and not face the reality that crushed him every time he crossed the threshold of the silent house. Work was the only place where he could pretend nothing had changed, where condolences seemed a little more distant, and where Carol's absence wasn't so suffocating. One night, when he arrived home exhausted, he found Sarah asleep on the couch, still clutching one of her mother's dresses to her chest. The little body trembled in the midst of restless sleep, and James felt a lump tighten his throat. He wasn't just losing Carol, he was losing Sarah too. He sat down beside his daughter and gently stroked her hair. "I'm sorry, Princess," he murmured, knowing she wouldn't hear him. "I don't know how to do this without her." The silence of the house was the only answer he received. 6 months had passed since the funeral, but time had brought no relief to the void that dominated the house. What once was a home filled with laughter and warmth now seemed only too large a space, too silent, as if all the happy moments had been trapped in the past. Sarah, who used to run through the bright corridors, now spent long hours locked in her room, her dolls forgotten in the corner, the drawings she used to love set aside. Her routine consisted of going to school and returning, without enthusiasm, without questions, without protests. The maids exchanged worried glances whenever they saw her pass by, too small for so much pain. They tried to encourage her to eat, suggested walks, offered to play with her, but the girl only shook her head, refusing everything. It was as if her voice had disappeared along with her mother. James, on the other hand, was rarely seen. He spent more and more time away, immersed in work as if avoiding the house was the only way to bear the loss. When he returned, it was already late, and even so, he never went to Sarah's room. He convinced himself that his daughter was asleep, but the truth was that often she was awake, listening to his footsteps in the hallway, waiting for a gesture, a word, anything that proved he still saw her existence. But James didn't come in. His absence was a weight that accumulated within Sarah. At first, she still hoped that her father would call her for breakfast as before, that he would take her to school, that he would hug her leisurely as he did when she had nightmares. But none of that happened, and gradually she gave up waiting. One morning, one of the household staff, a woman who had worked there for years, decided to take action. She found James in the office in a hurry, putting on his coat, already with the phone in his hand, ready to leave. "Mr. Gibbons," she called cautiously, hesitating when she saw the cold look he gave her. "What is it?" The impatience in his voice was evident, but she didn't back down. "It's about Sarah. Have you seen how she is? She doesn't speak to anyone, barely eats, and spends her days curled up in her room. This is not normal for a child." James clenched his jaw, averting his gaze. "She's dealing with it in her own way. With time, it will get better." "With time?" The woman hesitated, but continued. "Have you entered her room since it all happened?" The question hit like a punch. James opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't. Discomfort overcame him. "Miss Carroll would never have let this happen," the staff member continued, her voice lower but laden with an undeniable truth. James stood still for a moment before averting his gaze and grabbing his keys. "I'm late," and without another word, he left through the door, leaving the house as cold and silent as before. Upstairs, Sarah looked out the window, watching her father's car drive away. Her eyes no longer showed surprise, only a bitter acceptance. She knew that even when he returned, the house would remain empty. James sat in his office at the restaurant, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him, but unable to read a single word. The meeting that had just ended should have held his attention, but his mind was far away. The words he had heard that morning echoed in his head, heavy and uncomfortable. Miss Carroll would never have let this happen. He swallowed hard, closing his eyes for a moment, but the image of Sarah, withdrawn and silent, appeared in his mind as an inescapable reminder. He knew he was failing his daughter. He knew it every night when he passed by her room and saw the door closed, when he heard the faint creak of the bed as he realized she was still awake, waiting for something he couldn't provide. He simply didn't know how to be a father without Carol. She was the heart of the house, the bridge between him and Sarah, and now everything seemed shattered. Suddenly the phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He answered on the second ring, his professional voice instantly taking control. But when he heard Sarah's school principal on the other end of the line, his posture stiffened. "Mr. Gibbons, it's nothing serious, but I thought you should know. Sarah has been spending her breaks alone. She doesn't interact with the other children, and the teachers have noticed that she avoids any group activities. We know the recent loss has greatly affected your family, but we're concerned." She refuses to talk about her mother or anything that happened, as if she's completely shutting down. James ran his hand over his face, feeling a pang of guilt. He didn't need anyone to tell him what he already knew. "Thank you for letting me know," he replied, unable to say anything more before hanging up. When he returned home that night, the silence seemed even more suffocating. The lights were off upstairs, but he knew Sarah wasn't asleep yet. He hesitated for a moment before climbing the stairs, each step a reminder of how far he had drifted from his daughter. When he stopped in front of her bedroom door, his hand hovered over the knob, but at the last second, he gave up. As if crossing that threshold required a kind of strength he didn't possess. Sarah was awake, lying on her side, hugging one of her mother's dresses, as she did every night. She had heard her father's footsteps stop in front of the door and for a moment held her breath, hoping he would come in. But the silence remained, and then the footsteps faded away. Her chest tightened, and she squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the tears come without being able to hold them back. James, back in his office, poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat in the armchair, staring at the ceiling. Something had to change. He couldn't keep running away from his own home, his own daughter. But no matter how hard he tried, he didn't know how to fill that void. Then, for the first time, a thought he had been pushing away for months emerged. Sarah needed someone. He knew no woman could replace Carol, but maybe, just maybe, someone could bring a little warmth back to the house. And it was with this thought that, for the first time in months, James began to consider the idea of moving on. James's main restaurant chain exuded sophistication. The warm lighting gave an intimate touch to the setting, where business people, couples and families settled at impeccably arranged tables. The discreet sound of instrumental music filled the room, while uniformed waiters circulated among the guests, serving refined dishes. At one of the tables near the glass wine cellar, a woman observed everything with calculated attention. Victoria. She wasn't there by chance. Dressed in an elegant black dress that subtly accentuated her curves, delicate jewelry on her wrists and fingers, she held a wine glass with the impeccable posture of someone accustomed to frequenting places like this. Her eyes discreetly scanned the restaurant, but it was James who drew her attention. He was on the other side of the dining room, standing next to the manager, reviewing notes in a small leather notebook. Tall, dressed in a well-cut suit, he had the serious expression of someone who immersed himself in work to forget life outside. Victoria smiled slightly, resting her elbow on the table, watching him like a hunter analyzing her prey. It wasn't difficult to obtain information about James Gibbons. The recent tragedy, the loss of his wife, his fortune, his influence in the restaurant business, and more interestingly than anything, the evident void he carried. As James walked past her table, attentive to the orders he was giving the manager, Victoria seized the moment to let her glass slip from her fingertips. The glass hit the floor, shattering with a sound that stood out in the refined setting. James turned at the sound of the noise, and that's when their gazes crossed. "My God, what a disaster," Victoria murmured, bringing her hands to her face in a subtly theatrical way, as if she were truly embarrassed. Before the waiter could intervene, James approached. "Is everything all right, miss?" His voice was polite but detached. Victoria looked up at him, smiling slightly. "Yes, I was just a little clumsy. I think I got carried away with the wine." She laughed softly, a delicate and well-calculated sound. James nodded to the waiter. "Bring another glass for the lady." She watched the way he handled the situation, direct, without fuss, but without losing elegance. "Thank you, Mr. Gibbons." He raised his eyebrows, surprised. "You know me? Who doesn't know?" She tilted her head slightly, her eyes sparkling in an amused tone. "Your restaurants are a reference, and your story. Well, let's just say I've read some reports about what happened." James tensed briefly. He didn't like strangers mentioning his personal life, but there was something about the way Victoria spoke, without pity, without regret, that made him relax minimally. She picked up the new glass the waiter brought and raised it slightly. "I hope you accept an apology toast for the inconvenience." James hesitated for a moment before picking up his own glass. The glasses clinked lightly, and Victoria smiled. That's how she introduced herself. With a precise look, a rehearsed approach, and the patience of someone who knew exactly how to play the game. In the months that followed, Victoria knew exactly how to conduct each step. At first, her presence was subtle, always wrapped in a natural charm and a delicacy that made her seem harmless. She appeared casually at the right moments, never forcing her entry, but also never allowing James to forget her. An occasional dinner, a chance encounter at the restaurant, a brief message asking about Sarah as if she cared. Everything was meticulously calculated to create a bond. And James, tired of the loneliness that consumed his days, allowed that approach to grow without resistance. The pain of loss was still present, but Victoria knew how to fill the empty spaces without seeming intrusive. She didn't speak of Carol unless he mentioned her, and when she did, her response was always perfect. A touch of understanding, a look of respect for the past, but without dwelling too long on it. It was always about the future, about moving forward without guilt, about accepting that happiness could be found again. And James, fragile and tired of coming home to nothing but suffocating silence, began to believe that perhaps it was true. Sarah, however, saw everything with different eyes. From the very first moment, she felt there was something wrong with that woman. She couldn't explain exactly what, but her instinct shouted that Victoria wasn't what she pretended to be. The way she smiled seemed too rehearsed, the way she approached her father, as if she always knew what to say to make him smile, as if she were playing a game that only she knew the rules. But James didn't see it. He only saw a charming woman who somehow made him feel less lost. When Victoria started frequenting the house, Sarah closed herself off even more. At first, she tried to escape to her room as soon as she saw her, but the stepmother soon noticed and began to occupy spaces with a disquieting naturalness. In no time, she was helping to organize dinners, suggesting changes to the decor and starting to get involved in the details of daily life. More than that, she observed. She studied the house, the staff, the routines, absorbing everything with the patience of someone who knew her place. There was already guaranteed. 6 months later, James announced the marriage, and Sarah felt the ground disappear from under her feet. He gathered the few close friends and staff, gave a speech about how Victoria brought light into his life and how they deserved a new chance to be happy. The girl looked at her father, hoping he would notice her discomfort, her anguish, hoping he would realize the mistake he was making. But he saw nothing. His eyes were on Victoria, who held his hand with a sweet smile, the perfect image of a woman in love. The ceremony was simple but elegant, organized quickly and without fanfare. Victoria didn't want ostentation. She said she preferred something intimate, a clear sign that she wasn't there for the status or the money. But for Sarah, that only confirmed how manipulative she was. As people toasted the couple, she watched Victoria from afar, seeing the discreet satisfaction on her face as if she had just won a game. The next day, she was already installed in the mansion, and the first change was subtle, but undeniable. Victoria introduced herself to all the staff with friendliness, praised the team, and stated that she wanted to keep everything as it had always been. But Sarah noticed the careful look she gave each one, as if she were assessing who posed a risk and who could be easily molded. The new Mrs. Gibbons was just beginning her game, and Sarah knew no one there was really prepared for what was to come. The silence of the house seemed thicker now. Since Victoria had started living there, the atmosphere was no longer the same. Everything seemed meticulously organized, the flowers always perfectly arranged in the vases, the furniture slightly repositioned, the once bustling corridors now shrouded in an air of restraint. For the staff, the change was subtle, a natural adaptation to the new presence. For Sarah, it was a sign. She saw how the house no longer belonged to them, but to Victoria, who gradually wove her threads, taking control of everything without anyone realizing it. The first time they were alone was a milestone. James had left early for work, and the staff were busy with their tasks, leaving Sarah in the living room, drawing on a sheet of paper while pretending not to notice Victoria sitting a few meters away, watching her. The silence dragged on for minutes until the stepmother got up and, with slow steps, approached. "You're a very quiet girl, Sarah. That's not good," Victoria said, her voice sweet but laced with something cold. She sat down beside her, picking up one of the colored pencils from the table and twirling it between her fingers. Your father thinks everything is fine, that you just need time. But I know you don't like me. Sarah gripped the pencil tighter, not looking up. She didn't want to answer, didn't want to make room for a conversation, but her silence didn't seem to bother Victoria. No problem, the woman continued, leaning slightly closer. You can pretend as much as you like, but I see everything. I know you watch me, analyze me as if you could decipher me. That's very clever of you, but it won't change anything. I'm here to stay. The girl felt her heart race but remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the paper. Your father loves me, and I take care of him, something your mother can no longer do, Victoria said now in a sharp, almost cutting whisper. So why don't we make things easier? You pretend to adore me in front of him and I pretend you exist. Or if you want to make everything more difficult, I can show you how I really am when no one is watching. It was the first time Sarah felt a real chill. She raised her eyes and for a brief moment saw Victoria's real face, the delicate mask giving way to something dark, cruel, a perverse satisfaction, hidden behind the impeccable smile. But before she could react, the footsteps of one of the staff echoed down the hallway, and in the blink of an eye, Victoria was once again the kind and adorable woman everyone saw. Dear, your drawing is beautiful. Your father will love to see this. She rose with the same smoothness with which she had approached, and with one last victorious look left the room, leaving Sarah with her stomach in knots. After that day, the girl understood that she needed to be careful. No one would believe her. In everyone's eyes, Victoria was perfect, always attentive to the staff, dedicated to her husband, involved in charitable causes, and a friend to all around her. James didn't see the subtle changes, but Sarah saw them. Gradually, staff members who had worked in the house for years began to leave. Some were fired without explanation, others resigned on their own, claiming the atmosphere had changed. Those who stayed became more cautious, as if walking on shards of glass. Victoria made sure to keep her image untouched, always by James's side at company events, smiling for the cameras, praising his daughter whenever anyone asked. She posed as a devoted wife, the woman who brought color to the life of a shattered widower, and everyone believed her. Sarah, however, saw the details that no one else noticed. How Victoria always appeared when James was about to notice his daughter's suffering. How she subtly convinced him that Sarah was just going through a phase, that she would adapt in time. How she pushed away anyone who might question her role in that house. Victoria's mask was impeccable, but Sarah knew the truth, and now she needed to figure out how to deal with it. Sarah spent days mulling over every word Victoria had said. The fear grew in her chest, but she knew she couldn't let it continue. Her father needed to know. He needed to see what was happening in his own home before it was too late. So that night, when James came home from work and sat on the couch with an exhausted expression, she summoned courage and approached, her heart racing, her fingers clutching the fabric of her dress. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Her voice came out hesitant but determined. James sighed, massaging his temples before looking at his daughter. "Of course, Princess. What is it?" Sarah bit her lip, gathering all the courage she had. "It's about Victoria. She's not who you think she is. When we're alone, she's different. She threatens me, says mean things, but pretends to be nice when there are people around." James frowned, leaning forward slightly. "Sarah, what are you saying?" "She's mean, Dad. She doesn't like me. She just pretends when you're around. You have to believe me." Her voice trembled, the desperation evident. Before James could respond, Victoria appeared at the living room entrance, holding a cup of tea and wearing the same gentle expression as always. "Dear, what's going on?" Her voice carried false concern, perfectly calculated. James looked at his wife, then at his daughter, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Sarah saw the uncertainty in his eyes and grabbed her father's hand, silently begging him to believe her. Victoria sighed, sitting down next to James and placing the cup on the table gently. "Oh, my love, I think I know what's happening." She looked at Sarah with a condescending smile. "You've been missing your mother, haven't you? And now that I'm here, I know it can seem strange, but I would never try to take her place." James let out a heavy sigh, passing his hand over his face. "Sarah, dear, you know I love you, But you need to give Victoria a chance. I know things have changed, but it's not fair to treat her like this." Shock coursed through the girl's body like a cutting chill. He didn't believe her. He would never believe her. On the other side of the house, Anna watched from the kitchen, her expression tense. She had seen many things in the years she had worked there. And now, seeing Sarah's wide eyes and Victoria's triumphant face, she knew something was deeply wrong in that house. Days turned into weeks and Sarah realized that nothing would change. Her father didn't believe her. Every time she tried to warn him about Victoria, she received the same gentle response, a request for her to make an effort, to give her stepmother a chance. But Sarah knew the truth, and Victoria knew that she knew. That made everything worse. The woman no longer needed to pretend when they were alone. Her patience had run out, and now she made no effort to hide her contempt. Victoria also knew that James would never see her for who she really was. And that's why she began to prepare the ground to distance him. With the sweet, persuasive tone he had already learned to trust, she convinced him that the company needed him more than ever, that travel was inevitable to ensure the growth of the business. He resisted at first, arguing that Sarah still needed him, but Victoria took care of alleviating his guilt. "She needs to learn to be independent," she said with a smile. "Besides, you can trust me to take care of her." And James believed her. The trips became frequent. At first they were just a few days, but soon they lasted weeks. Every time he left, Sarah felt the knot tighten in her throat, knowing that meant being alone with Victoria. The woman waited until the door closed, and James's footsteps faded down the hall before turning to the girl, her gaze laden with cruel pleasure. "Now, dear," she said, crossing her arms with a cold smile, "it's just you and me." At first, Victoria merely ignored Sarah. She would pass by her without saying a word, as if the girl were a ghost inside her own home. Then came the little humiliations. She would make her dine alone in the kitchen, while she ate in the main hall. She would lock her in her room for hours without explanation, depriving her of the freedom that had once been natural to her. But, over time, that too was not enough. The first time Victoria locked Sarah in the basement was on a cold night, after a tense dinner during which the girl, unable to hold back any longer, retaliated against a provocation from her stepmother. Victoria's face hardened, and before Sarah could move, she felt herself pulled by the arm, dragged through the corridors of the house to the door leading to the dark stairs. The woman pushed her inside, slamming the door shut. "Let's see if you learn to have good manners," she said before turning the key in the lock. Sarah kicked the door, pounded with her little fists, shouted her father's name, even though she knew he wasn't there. The silence on the other side was her only answer. The cold soon seeped into her bones, and she huddled in a corner, hugging her knees while silent tears streamed down her face. The days that followed were worse. Whenever Victoria got angry, Sarah was thrown into the basement as punishment, sometimes for hours, other times for an entire day. But one day, the stepmother decided to go further. Tired of the girl's insolence, she had an iron grate structure installed in a corner of the basement, forming a small, cramped space where Sarah was locked up like an animal. The iron was icy cold, the rusted bars joined by thick chains. Victoria passed by the grate, observing Sarah huddled on the ground, and smiled disdainfully. "Now you'll learn to respect me," she muttered, tapping her fingers on the bars. "Ungrateful children don't deserve freedom." Sarah tried to hold back her tears, but fear gripped her chest. The space was too small, and the only thing Victoria tossed in for her was a thin blanket and a plate of cold leftovers. She spent 2 days in there, huddled, while the stepmother tested her patience. The basement got colder and colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around her. The hunger hurt, but the worst was the silence, the weight of loneliness crushing her heart. When Victoria finally opened the makeshift cage, she looked at Sarah with a satisfied smile. "Let's see if you've learned your lesson," she said, holding the door open. "If you behave, maybe you won't need to come back here." Sarah came out hesitantly, her muscles aching, the fear still present. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't the end. Victoria would throw her back in there whenever she wanted. The darkness of the basement was absolute, a dense, suffocating shadow that swallowed everything around it. Sarah no longer knew how many times she had been locked in there, but each new time it seemed that the time stretched longer. The biting cold of the concrete floor penetrated her skin, and the musty smell impregnated the heavy air, making it even harder to breathe. But now it wasn't just a temporary punishment. Victoria had turned that space into her new reality. The first time she realized something had changed was when she tried to push the door and found that it wasn't just locked, but reinforced. Before, there had always been a chance, a glimmer of hope, that someone would walk by and hear her. Now, no. When the stepmother decided that Sarah should no longer leave without her permission, she provided a double latch, installing locks that ensured that not even the staff could help her, should they try. "You're getting so smart, dear," Victoria murmured one night, crouching in front of the door to talk to the girl. "But so am I. You can scream all you want. No one will hear you." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut in the darkness, trying to hold back her tears. There were no more makeshift beds with old blankets. Now all she had was a dry patch of floor in one corner, and if she was lucky, a thin, dirty blanket that Victoria would toss to her from time to time. The days began to blur together, losing their shape. There were no clocks, no windows. The only light she saw was when the door opened to let in a plate of leftover food that Victoria tossed onto the floor as if feeding an animal. It was cold rice, stale bread, pieces of dried-out meat. At first, Sarah tried to resist, clinging to the childish pride she still carried in her chest. But hunger soon overcame her. With small, trembling hands, she took what she could, eating slowly, feeling each bite scrape her dry throat. When James called the house, Victoria answered with the same sweetness as always, her velvet voice laden with lies. "Sarah is fine, dear. She's at school, busy with her homework. Oh yes, she misses you, but she understands you need to work. I'm taking care of everything here, you can rest easy." And he believed her. Sarah no longer knew how long she had been there when she began to notice that her vision was deteriorating. The continuous darkness made her eyes struggle to adjust whenever a beam of light appeared, making her even more fragile. Her legs grew weaker when she tried to stand, her emaciated body too frail to support itself for long. And each time Victoria appeared, she brought with her that triumphant look, satisfied to see the girl's resistance waning. "You're learning, aren't you?" she would murmur as she tossed a plate of food onto the floor, watching as Sarah hesitated for a moment before crawling towards it. "See how much easier everything is when you do what I want." Sarah clenched her fists, hatred growing inside her. But her frail body couldn't keep up with her anger. All she could do was wait and survive. Sarah no longer knew how much time had passed since she was locked in the basement. The days and nights blurred into an endless cycle of hunger, cold and silence. Her body grew weaker, her thin bones jutting out under her skin, her tangled hair falling over her small shoulders. Her once clean, pretty dress was now soiled and crumpled. The girl could barely stand without feeling dizzy, and sometimes she wondered if this was her fate, if she would never leave there. The hope, which once shone discreetly inside her, was fading. She no longer knocked on the door, no longer called for her father. She knew no one would come. James was far away, believing Victoria's lies. The intimidated employees pretended not to see what was happening, and she was alone. It was during one of those endless nights that something unexpected happened. Sarah heard footsteps in the hallway and automatically shrank into the corner of the basement, expecting to see Victoria's cruel face appear at the door. But when the doorknob turned and a crack of light invaded the dark environment, the echoing voice was not that of her stepmother. "Little one?" The low and urgent whisper made Sarah blink a few times, trying to adjust her eyes to the brightness. Anna was there, kneeling near the half-open door, holding a small bundle. Sarah hesitated for a moment before slowly crawling forward, her weak knees trembling with the effort. Anna placed a finger on her lips, asking for silence, and extended the bundle. "Take it, but eat slowly, your stomach is not used to it." With trembling hands, Sarah unfolded the cloth and found a piece of soft bread and a bit of still warm meat. Her heart raced. She hadn't eaten something decent for days. Without hesitation, she brought a piece to her mouth, chewing slowly, savoring the food as if it were the best thing in the world. Anna's eyes filled with tears as she watched her like that. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured, "but I can't ignore what she's doing to you." Sarah looked at the woman with a gleam of gratitude in her tired eyes. But before she could say something, A noise in the hallway made Anna turn abruptly. The door was pulled hard, and Victoria appeared, her eyes sparking with fury at the scene before her. "How lovely," said the stepmother, crossing her arms. The dedicated chef feeding the ungrateful little girl. Anna jumped up, trying to block Sarah with her body. "She's a child, Victoria. You can't treat her like this." Victoria smiled, but her eyes were as cold as ice. "I can do whatever I want. And if you want to keep your job, you'll forget you were here." Anna clenched her fists, but she knew she couldn't risk it. With one last look at Sarah, she turned and left, leaving the girl alone again. This time, however, Sarah didn't just feel fear. She felt something stronger. Hatred. The darkness of the basement no longer scared Sarah like before. She had gotten used to the solitude, the cold and the hunger that gripped her stomach in cycles that seemed endless. But that night, something different happened. As she huddled against the wall, hugging her knees to try to conserve the little warmth she had, a faint sound caught her attention. It wasn't the usual creak of aged wood or the wind whistling through the cracks. It was a voice. She raised her head, frowning. The sound came from the ceiling, muffled, as if someone was speaking from the other side of the wall. Her heart raced when she realized it came from a small air duct just above her. She stood up with difficulty, stretching her neck to hear better. "I already said it's all under control." Victoria's voice was firm, but carried an impatient tone. Sarah held her breath. "Yes, of course he still doesn't know. Do you think I'd be stupid enough to tell James anything? He believes every word I say." The air seemed to freeze around the girl. Sarah pursed her lips, her heart pounding against her chest. She tried to focus, to catch every detail of the conversation, the whispered words that came through the duct. "You worry too much. The plan worked, didn't it? It was a perfect accident." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, stifling the sob that threatened to escape. Accident. She was talking about her mother. Her knees gave way, and she slid back to the ground, feeling a different chill run through her body. Her mother hadn't died by chance. Victoria had something to do with it. Her childish mind wanted to deny it, wanted to believe she had misunderstood, but deep down, she knew it was true. For months she had felt that her stepmother was cruel and manipulative, but now she understood that it was something much worse. Victoria wasn't just mean, she was dangerous. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to breathe. If she told her father, would he believe her? No. He hadn't listened before, and he wouldn't listen now. If she wanted justice for her mother, she would need to prove what she knew. The idea came as a whisper in her mind. Record the conversations. She dragged herself to a corner of the basement where some old objects were piled. Among dusty boxes and forgotten furniture, her fingers found something cold and rectangular. A phone. It was an old model, probably left there years ago. Sarah pressed the side button, hoping it would still work. The screen flickered faintly before turning off. The girl's heart beat faster. She would need to charge it. But how? Her mind worked quickly. She remembered when she used to help her mother clean the house, and how she always left a charger stored in the pantry. If she could get out of the basement, she could get it. The next day, when Victoria unlocked the door to give her food, Sarah acted carefully. She took the plate with trembling hands and pretended to be weaker than she really was. "Please, can I go to the bathroom? I can't take it anymore here." Her voice came out low, broken. Victoria looked at her with boredom, but then rolled her eyes. "If you try anything, I'll double the time you'll be here." The girl just nodded, keeping her head down. She was quick. On the short walk down the hallway, she ran her hand over the forgotten charger in the corner of the pantry and hid it in the pocket of her dress. When she returned to the basement, she kept the dejected expression, pretending to be even weaker than before. That night, while Victoria slept upstairs, Sarah plugged the phone into the makeshift outlet and waited. The screen flickered dimly, and after a few seconds, the device turned on. Its battery was low, but it still worked. She found the voice recorder and tested a whisper. Test. The recording played, and her own voice sounded faint but clear. Her plan had begun. Now she just needed to wait for more conversations. Anna had always been observant. Years of experience in the kitchen had taught her to notice details that went unnoticed by others. But what began as an uneasy silence soon became a certainty. Something was wrong with the restaurant's finances. She noticed the first irregularity when she needed to check the inventory and found a report with strange numbers. The orders for ingredients had increased, but the kitchen wasn't using as much as the records indicated. Then she began to notice documents that appeared suddenly, authorizations signed by James, but which she knew he would never sign without reviewing them. And there was Victoria, always discreetly hovering, increasingly involved in the business, suggesting changes, approving expenses without anyone questioning. That night, after the kitchen closed and the staff left, Anna stayed behind. With a quick look around, she opened the office drawer and pulled out some papers. Her heart beat faster when she saw transfers made to accounts she didn't recognize, forged signatures, and amounts that simply disappeared from the records. Victoria was embezzling money, and James, blindly trusting her, had no idea. Anna knew she needed to act carefully. If Victoria suspected someone was watching her steps, she would do everything to cover her tracks. But Anna also knew she couldn't face her stepmother alone. She hadn't seen the girl for days. Since she was caught helping her in the basement, Victoria avoided letting her get close to her. But Anna was patient. She knew that if she waited for the right moment, she would find a gap. The chance came late at night when she saw Victoria leave the house and get into the car, probably for one of her expensive dinners, paid for with the money she stole. Anna took advantage. She took a small bundle of food she had set aside and went to the basement, moving quickly and silently. When she opened the door, her heart tightened at seeing Sarah huddled in the corner, her eyes sunken and her body too thin. The girl raised her face at the sound and, recognizing Anna, her expression changed. "I brought food," the chef murmured, extending the bundle with trembling hands. Sarah slowly took it, her thin fingers trembling as she tore the paper. She began to eat slowly, as Anna had advised the last time. "She's stealing from your father," Anna said softly. Sarah's eyes shone, and the girl leaned forward, alerted. "Embezzling money from the restaurant. James doesn't see it because he trusts her too much, but I found the documents." Sarah swallowed hard and then whispered, "I also found something out. She spoke on the phone about my mother. She said it was the perfect accident." Anna felt a chill run through her body. "I recorded it." The girl's voice was small but carried a quiet strength. The chef took a deep breath. "We need more evidence." Sarah nodded. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. Now they had an alliance. Sarah and Anna knew they couldn't act hastily. Victoria was cunning, manipulative, and always one step ahead. If they made a mistake, everything would be lost. So, they began to plan every detail carefully. The next night, Anna returned to the basement, making sure Victoria was busy upstairs. She handed Sarah a piece of bread and whispered, "We need more evidence. If she did something to your mother, she must have done it to other people." Sarah nodded, her heart beating fast. "She's always talking on the phone with someone. If I can get more recordings, maybe we can prove it." Anna thought for a moment, before taking a folded piece of paper from the pocket of her apron. "I managed to access some documents in the restaurant office. Victoria's name appears in old records, but with different last names. I decided to research further and found something strange." Sarah's eyes widened as the woman continued. "She was married before, twice. Both husbands died in accidents. One was a businessman like your father, the other an investor." The girl's breath caught in her throat. "She's done this before." Anna nodded, her eyes heavy with seriousness. "And we can't let her do it again." The plan began to take shape. Sarah would continue recording Victoria's conversations, hoping the stepmother would say something incriminating. Meanwhile, Anna would gather the documents showing the embezzlement and look for connections to the previous scams. In the following days, Sarah remained attentive to Victoria's every move. Whenever she heard her voice through the air duct, she turned on the hidden cell phone recorder. She knew she had to be patient, that one recording wouldn't be enough. She needed to catch Victoria in something definitive. At the same time, Anna got in touch with an old friend who worked in public records. With his help, she obtained documents about Victoria's past marriages, the death certificates of her husbands, and even old suspicions of fraud. Nothing had ever been proven, but now perhaps it would be different. The pieces were fitting together. "She can't keep doing this," Sarah whispered to Anna one night, her gaze determined despite the frailty of her body. "And she won't," the chef replied. The investigation had begun. Victoria always knew that maintaining control required more than just intimidation. It took intelligence, anticipation, and a watchful eye for the smallest details. In recent days, however, small changes had begun to bother her. Sarah, who could barely get up before, seemed a little less weak, and the lost look she carried had been replaced by something Victoria didn't like to see. "This girl hasn't given up completely," she muttered to herself as she watched the staff circulating through the house. But that wasn't all. Anna was also acting differently. In the last few days, the chef had become more reserved, cautious, as if she were hiding something. Victoria didn't believe in coincidences and knew she needed to find out what was going on before it was too late. Determined to better understand the situation, she began to pay attention to the smallest details. She noticed how Anna avoided crossing paths with her directly, how she would disappear for minutes and return with cautious expressions. All of that made her suspicious. That night, when the house was silent and James was already asleep, Victoria walked slowly down the hallway, making sure no one saw her. She stopped near the kitchen, where she saw Anna taking a small bag out of the cupboard. "Interesting," she whispered, narrowing her eyes as she watched the woman head towards the basement. So that was it. Anna was helping Sarah. Victoria didn't act immediately. She knew that impulsiveness could ruin her plans and that, to crush any resistance, she needed to be meticulous. The next morning, during breakfast, she served James with a light smile and sighed before casually commenting, "Darling, I've noticed something strange with the staff lately. Some seem distracted, perhaps even negligent. I'm starting to think we need to reassess the team." James, tired and accustomed to trusting his wife to handle household matters, took a sip of coffee before responding. "Do you really think something's wrong? We've never had problems with the staff before." Victoria tilted her head, pensive, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not saying there's a problem, just that I've noticed changes. The kitchen doesn't seem as organized as before, and I think some orders are being ignored. It may just be my impression, but—" She sighed, running her fingers lightly along the edge of the cup. "I know you trust Anna a lot, but even the oldest ones can slip up sometimes." James frowned but didn't show much concern. "If there's something wrong, I trust you'll know how to handle it." Victoria smiled, satisfied with the response. She knew that in time she could convince James that Anna was a problem and push her away before the chef had a chance to intervene. Later, as she passed through the kitchen hallway, she crossed glances with Anna and noticed something that deeply irritated her. The woman didn't seem scared. On the contrary, there was a glint of defiance in her eyes, a silent firmness that indicated she hadn't given up yet. Victoria narrowed her eyes and smirked. "You're playing a dangerous game, my dear," she muttered to herself before going her way. But if Anna thought she could beat her, she was sorely mistaken. Victoria never liked surprises, and the suspicion that Anna might be interfering with her plans consumed her like a silent poison. After the conversation with James, she knew she needed to act quickly before any evidence against her came to light. Walking through the house, her mind worked tirelessly in search of a definitive solution. If Anna was helping Sarah, she needed to be eliminated. But before that, she needed to be sure the girl wasn't keeping anything that could hurt her. She waited until the house was quiet. The staff were busy with their routines and James would be at the restaurant all day. It was the perfect moment. She descended the basement stairs slowly, feeling the smell of mold and dust in the air. Each step echoed on the cold walls, and the darkness seemed heavier inside. Sarah, huddled in the corner, raised her head at the sound of footsteps, her eyes wide with fear. Victoria smiled slightly, knowing that her mere presence was enough to cause terror in the girl. "I hope you've enjoyed your little rest time down here, dear," she murmured, looking around. "But I have a feeling you've been smarter than you should." Sarah remained silent, but Victoria noticed the slight tremor in the girl's hands. She was hiding something. Her keen gaze scanned every corner of the basement, the old furniture, the forgotten boxes, and the damp stone floor. Moving slowly, she began to search the most likely spaces, opening boxes, pushing objects aside, examining every nook and cranny of the walls. "You know, I've always thought children were more predictable," she commented, her voice as sharp as a blade. "But you've been surprising me lately. That's good. And bad at the same time." It was then that she saw something under one of the boxes, a small metallic glint, barely perceptible. Her heart raced, and she reached out, pushing the object out of the shadows. But before she could grab it, Sarah reacted. No. The girl lunged forward, clutching the old small cell phone to her chest. Victoria's gaze narrowed, and her smile vanished. So that was it. Sarah had something against her, something she was desperately trying to hide. But Victoria knew how to be patient. She didn't need to snatch the evidence at that moment. There were other ways to ensure no one would believe her. Leaving the basement with calculated steps, Victoria already had a plan in mind. Anna was the biggest threat at the moment, and her elimination needed to be immediate. In the kitchen, she watched the woman working, deftly chopping vegetables while coordinating the other staff. Victoria approached slowly, folding her arms and adopting her most controlled expression. "Anna, I need to talk to you now." The chef looked up, wiping her hands on her apron before following her to a more secluded corner. "What is it?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Victoria sighed as if deeply disappointed. "It's hard for me to say this, but I've discovered something very serious. I found out that money is going missing from the restaurant's pantry. Small amounts at a time, but enough to raise suspicions. And unfortunately, the records point to you." Anna blinked, surprised, but showed no fear. "That's absurd. I've never stolen anything from here." Victoria gave a sad smile, feigning compassion. "I really wanted to believe that, Anna. But you know how these things are. When there's evidence, it's hard to ignore. And I need to protect my husband's interests." Anna crossed her arms, her eyes now laden with defiance. "Does James know about this? Has he seen this so-called evidence?" Her stepmother tilted her head, studying the woman in front of her. "Not yet. But do you really think he would doubt my word? You know how much he trusts me." The silence that followed was enough to make it clear that Victoria had already won that battle. Anna could fight, try to defend herself, but she was already condemned. "I'll let you leave discreetly," Victoria continued, lowering her voice as if being generous. "No scandals, no involving the police. I think that's best for both of us, don't you?" Anna clenched her fists, containing the rage that boiled inside her. "You think you've won, don't you?" she whispered. "But no matter how hard you try to hide it, the truth always finds a way to come out." Victoria merely smiled, satisfied with her victory. "We'll see," she replied softly, before walking away, feeling the pleasure of destruction coursing through her veins. Anna was out of the way. Now only Sarah was left. Sarah knew Victoria was becoming more aggressive, but she also knew she needed to act quickly. The hidden cell phone in her chest was her only chance to prove the truth. That night, when she heard the sound of footsteps fading away and was sure she was alone, she took the device with trembling hands and turned on the faint screen. There were few recordings, but each one contained words that could change everything. If only she could protect that evidence. She knew Victoria suspected something, and that sooner or later she would come back to take whatever she was hiding. It was then that she had an idea. She took the cell phone to a dark corner of the basement, where some loose boards created a small space between the wall and the floor. With difficulty, she slid her thin fingers through the gap and placed the device there, pressing until it was hidden. But hiding wasn't enough. She needed to make sure the recordings weren't lost. Backup. Her mother used to talk about that word when saving photos on the computer, saying it was the only way to ensure nothing was erased. If she got a chance, she needed to send those recordings somewhere else. On the upper floor, Anna was tidying up her last things before leaving the house. Her dismissal had been quick and without time for farewells, exactly as Victoria wanted. But the chef wouldn't leave there empty-handed. Before leaving the restaurant for the last time, she had gone to the office and copied important documents, transferring suspicious files to a pen drive. There were records of irregular financial transactions, contracts signed by Victoria, and even a trail of money that simply disappeared from the company's accounts. Now, with those documents hidden in her bag, she knew she had something that could make a difference. As she folded the last piece of clothing, she felt a presence at the door. She turned and found Sarah, pale and weak, but with a gleam of determination in her eyes. "You can't go," she whispered, holding the doorframe tightly to steady herself. "If you go, no one else will be able to help me." Anna took a deep breath, feeling her heart tighten. "I don't want to go, little one. But if I stay, she could prevent me from really helping. Don't worry, I'm still on your side." Sarah hesitated, her lips trembling before murmuring, "I recorded her, I have proof, I just need to send it somewhere before she finds out." Anna widened her eyes and crouched down quickly, holding the girl's shoulders. "Did you manage to record it?" she whispered, her eyes alert. "Where's the phone?" Sarah pointed to the corner of the basement where she had hidden it. Anna nodded and ran a hand through her hair. "Listen, when I get out of here, I'll find a way to come back and help you, but you need to be strong and wait for the right moment." Sarah nodded, clenching her fists, feeling for the first time that she wasn't completely alone. As Anna went out the door, Victoria watched from the balcony, satisfied. She thought she had eliminated the girl's only ally, but she was about to discover how much she had underestimated them both. Victoria paced back and forth in the room, the heels of her shoes echoing on the wooden floor. Her patience was at its limit, and her control over the situation was beginning to crumble. Sarah shouldn't have been resisting for so long. The girl was just a child, but somehow she kept being a problem. Anna's interference was already resolved, but Victoria knew that wasn't enough. She needed a definitive solution. She picked up her phone and dialed a number, waiting a few seconds before hearing the man's voice on the other end of the line. "We have a problem," she said, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the dresser. "The girl is still here. James doesn't notice anything, but I feel like she's planning something." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I want you to handle this as we agreed before. Discreet. Quick. I need it to look like an accident." Sarah, huddled in the basement, held her breath as she heard every word through the air vent. Her heart was racing to the point where she felt she could faint at any moment. Victoria's voice was calm, cold, as if she were organizing a dinner, not planning to take a child's life. Cold sweat ran down her forehead, but she didn't move, forcing herself to listen to every detail. "I don't care how you do it," Victoria continued, impatient. "A stumble down the stairs, an electric shock, a gas leak. Just make sure it's quick and that no one suspects anything. The sooner she's out of the way, the better for everyone." Sarah swallowed the cry that threatened to escape. She was going to die. Victoria wasn't just playing or trying to scare her. This time, it was real. Her body trembled, and for a moment, she felt paralyzed, unable to think. But then, something inside her ignited. "No, I can't let this happen." She slowly moved away from the vent, trying to think of what to do. If she tried to tell her father, he wouldn't believe her. If she tried to run away, Victoria would find her. The only way out was to act before her stepmother's plan was put into action. Her eyes fell on the small phone hidden under the loose wood of the basement. She had to record more. She had to get more evidence. In the room, Victoria continued her conversation, now more careful. "James will be traveling this weekend. If it's done the night before, he'll be too far away to interfere. I want it to look like a household accident, nothing flashy. A slip in the bathroom, perhaps. Or a tragic mistake in the kitchen. She's already weak. Anything will be convincing." Sarah felt a lump in her throat, tears streaming down her face as she couldn't control them. She was just a child, but she knew her life depended on what she did in the next few days. She needed to get out of there. She needed to fight. Victoria hung up the phone, satisfied. This time, Sarah wouldn't escape. The storm began in the middle of the night, bringing with it thunderclaps that made the windows tremble. The rain fell heavily against the roof, and each lightning bolt briefly illuminated the darkness of the basement where Sarah was. Sitting in the cold corner, she felt her heart pounding in her chest, her breathing short and hurried. This was her chance. The storm would muffle any noise she made, and Victoria would probably be too busy to notice her absence right away. Sarah knew she wouldn't have another opportunity like this. If she stayed, she would die. If she ran, she might have a chance. But she had to be quick and silent. Swallowing her fear, she dragged herself to the locked door and ran her slender fingers along the rough wood, feeling the coarse texture under her trembling hands. She had tried to open that latch before, but had never had enough strength. Now, with adrenaline coursing through her body and desperation tightening her chest, she knew she couldn't fail. She looked around the basement, searching for something that could help her, until her eyes settled on one of the hinges of the old metal shelf leaning against the wall. Forcing herself to stand, she crossed the space and pulled hard on one of the rusted hooks of the structure, feeling the metal piece give way with a dull snap. She held it firmly, took a deep breath, and went back to the door. It had to work. With trembling hands, she wedged the piece of metal into the gap between the wood and the latch, twisting with all the strength she could muster. With each movement, she felt the sweat running down her neck, her arms aching from the effort. The rain outside continued to pound against the windows, muffling the small sounds she made. Then, in a sudden snap, she heard the metallic click of the lock coming loose. She had done it. The door creaked slightly as she pushed it open, but the thunderclap that exploded in the sky covered any noise. Sarah felt her legs weaken as she took her first steps, her body weakened by the time she had spent without eating properly. But she couldn't stop. Holding onto the wall to keep her balance, she climbed the stairs and entered the dark house. The hallway was empty and the lights were off. The clock on the wall read almost 3 in the morning. Victoria was probably sleeping. She needed to get to the front door and run outside before she noticed. A girl advanced as silently as possible across the hallway carpet, feeling her heart nearly burst inside her chest. Each step seemed a risk, but she couldn't hesitate. The door was a few meters away when a thunderclap briefly illuminated the room. And that's when she saw it. Victoria was standing at the top of the stairs. Time seemed to stop. The stepmother's gaze met hers at the same instant, and for a second of pure terror, Sarah couldn't move. Victoria, wearing a dark silk robe, held a wineglass in her hand, her eyes narrowed. Then, like a shadow, she began to slowly descend the steps. "What an unpleasant surprise," she murmured, her voice laced with venom. "I thought you had already learned your lesson, Sarah." The survival instinct finally broke the girl's shock. She had to run. Without a second thought, she spun on her heels and darted away from the house, her bare feet sliding on the smooth floor. She heard the sound of the glass cup shattering on the floor as Victoria dropped it and quickened her steps, her breathing growing heavier. "You think you can run from me?" The woman's voice echoed through the house, full of fury. "You think someone will believe you?" Sarah stumbled into the kitchen, tripping over one of the pieces of furniture before reaching the back door. Her fingers touched the cold doorknob, but before she could turn it, she felt a violent tug on her arm. Victoria held her tightly, her fingers digging into her fragile skin. "You're really starting to tire me," she hissed, pulling Sarah back. The girl struggled, trying to escape, but the woman's strength was far greater. "Let me go," Sarah screamed, her voice almost lost in the roar of thunder. Victoria pushed her against the wall with force, holding her face with one hand. "You want to know a secret?" she whispered, moving dangerously closer. "Your mother fought too, but in the end it was no use." Horror took hold of Sarah, and it was this terror that gave her strength. In a desperate act, she raised her knee with all her might and struck Victoria in the stomach. The woman let out a short cry of pain and loosened her grip, allowing the girl to break free. Without looking back, Sarah ran. She crossed the kitchen, pushed the door with all her might and went out into the storm. The heavy rain hit her immediately, drenching her dress and making each step more difficult, but she didn't stop. The cold cut into her skin, and the thunderclap seemed to explode around her. But nothing mattered but getting away from the house. Behind her, Victoria came stumbling out the door, her eyes full of fury. "You have nowhere to go, you ungrateful little pest," she shouted, her voice almost swallowed by the wind. Sarah ran across the soaked lawn, feeling her feet sink into the mud. She needed a place to hide, a place where she could take shelter until she could get help. Her eyes scanned the property, looking for any alternative. Then she saw a small barn at the end of the grounds. It was her only chance. With her heart pounding, she ran as fast as she could toward the barn. Victoria was behind, panting but determined. If she caught her now, it would all be over. Sarah reached the barn door and pushed it open, throwing herself inside and locking the latch before Victoria arrived. On the other side, she heard the woman scream in rage, banging against the wood, trying to force her way in. The girl backed away, trembling from head to toe, leaning against the wall as she tried to catch her breath. She had escaped, but she was far from safe. Sarah huddled in the corner of the barn, her body shivering from the cold, her breath short and uneven. The strong wind shook the wooden doors, and every thunderclap that exploded in the sky made her tremble. Outside, Victoria was still prowling, her shadow moving in the darkness as she pounded on the door with force. "Open this damn door, Sarah!" The voice carried fury, but also impatience. "You think you can hide forever? When I open this door, I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." The girl bit her lips, trying not to let fear take over. "Someone needs to find me. I need help." Her eyes scanned the space around her. searching for a way out, but the barn was small and the only exit was blocked by her stepmother. She was cornered, and Victoria knew it. In the midst of the storm, Anna drove down the deserted road, her heart racing. Since being kicked out of the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The way Victoria had gotten rid of her so quickly, how James seemed blind to everything. Nothing made sense. Determined to see for herself, she picked up the phone and called one of the restaurant employees, asking about Sarah. "No one's seen her for days, Anna." The tense voice on the other end of the line confirmed her worst fears. "I think she doesn't even leave her room anymore." The chef didn't think twice. She turned around on the road, accelerating the car through the intense rain. As she approached the mansion, she realized something was wrong. The lights were off, but the gate to the property was ajar. A chill ran down her spine. Something happened here. Inside the barn, Sarah held her breath when she heard footsteps nearby. Victoria had stopped banging and was now tampering with the latch, trying to force it open. "You have no way out," she murmured, her voice calmer now, as if trying to sound reasonable. "Stop running and let's talk. You know I'm the only one who can take care of you now." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest, her heart pounding when a loud noise echoed across the field. Headlights illuminated the side of the house and, for a moment, Victoria froze. "But what the hell?" she hissed, turning to see the car that had just pulled up at the entrance to the property. Anna stepped out of the vehicle, her rain cape fluttering in the wind, her eyes filled with urgency. "Where's Sarah?" she shouted, her voice firm, determined. Victoria turned slowly, regaining her mask of false calm. "Anna, what a surprise," she said, crossing her arms. "If you've come looking for trouble, I can assure you it's not a good idea." "I know she's here," Anna continued, ignoring the woman's threatening tone. "And if you don't open that door right now, I'll call the police myself." Sarah heard everything from inside, her eyes wide with hope. "Anna!" she screamed, banging on the door, desperate. "I'm here, help me!" Victoria's expression changed in an instant. She knew she had lost. The girl's voice, Anna's insistence, the car parked at the entrance. It all meant that in a few minutes more people would arrive. "You shouldn't have come back," she muttered, her voice now laden with frustration. But Anna was already taking the phone out of her pocket, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed the numbers. She did not hesitate. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her voice came out firm when she brought the device to her ear. "I'm calling the police," she warned, pressing the button to dial. The phone's ring seemed to last an eternity, echoing through the mansion's hall, where for so long only Victoria's silence and manipulation had reigned. Sarah watched it all with wide eyes, her small body tense with expectation. For so long no one had listened to her cries for help, but now, at that moment, the truth would finally find a way out of the darkness. Looking around, the girl realized how different the house seemed. The shadows that once seemed to swallow every corner now trembled before the imminent change. Victoria's lies were about to crumble. Anna turned to Sarah and firmly grasped her hand. "This time no one will ignore you," she promised, her gaze full of determination. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She didn't need to say anything. She knew that finally she was close to being saved. The red and blue lights of the police cars flashed at the mansion's entrance, reflecting on the imposing facade of the house that, for so long, had been a place of dark secrets. The sound of sirens still echoed in the air as the officers entered, their boots wet from the storm creaking against the wooden floor. Sarah, still trembling, stood beside Anna, holding tightly onto the chef's hand as if it were her only anchor. Victoria, on the other hand, maintained her rigid posture, arms crossed, face impassive, as if all of this were a big mistake. "Mrs. Gibbons," one of the officers said as he approached, his gaze cold and evaluating. "We received a serious complaint about mistreatment and possible attempted homicide. We need to inspect the house premises." Victoria raised her eyebrows, forcing a mocking laugh. "This is absurd," she declared, leaning forward slightly as if outraged. "I am responsible for this house. My stepdaughter is confused and clearly influenced by this woman." She shot Anna a cold look before continuing. "She just wants to harm me because she was fired, and now she's putting ideas in a child's head." Anna kept her expression firm, not averting her gaze, but it was Sarah who took a step forward, her voice trembling but determined. "She locked me in the basement," she said, her breathing heavy, "and I have proof." The silence that followed was crushing. The officers exchanged glances before one of them nodded to one of the agents. "Check the basement. If you find anything suspicious, document everything." Sarah felt her stomach churn as she saw Victoria remain motionless, her eyes as cold as ever. But there was something different now. A subtle tension at the corner of her mouth, a tightening of her fingers against her own arm. She knew everything was crumbling. It didn't take long for the first officers to return. "We found a locked space in the basement," one of them announced, holding a flashlight. "The environment is unhealthy, and there are clear signs that it was used to keep someone imprisoned." Victoria's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw when her fingers tightened into fists almost imperceptibly. "That proves nothing," the stepmother said, keeping her voice controlled. "It could be anything. There's no concrete evidence that Sarah was there against her will." It was then that Sarah finally took her cell phone out of her pocket and held it firmly, feeling the weight of everything she went through reflected in that small object. She looked at the officer in front of her before unlocking the screen. "I recorded her," she said, her voice stronger now. "I have proof of the things she said. About my mother. About me." The officer took the cell phone from Sarah's hands and pressed the button to play the first recording. And then Victoria's cutting words filled the room. A stumble down the stairs, an electric shock, a gas leak. "Just make sure it's quick, and that no one suspects anything." James arrived at that exact moment. His gaze was tired, confused, but as the recorded words echoed through the room, his face lost all color. He looked at Sarah, then at Victoria, and seemed unable to process what he was hearing. What is this?" His voice came out low, laden with disbelief. Sarah turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears but without fear. "She killed Mom, Dad," she said, her voice firm even though her chest ached, "and she wanted to do the same to me." The room was silent, broken only by the sound of the recording that still echoed through the environment. Victoria's cold and calculated voice filled every corner of the house, exposing her crimes in an irrefutable way. James remained still, motionless, his eyes wide, as if his mind refused to accept the truth that was right in front of him. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on her father, waiting, begging for him to see what he never wanted to see. Victoria, however, did not back down. She never backed down. Even surrounded by police officers, even with James finally seeing the truth, she maintained her rigid posture, her eyes sparking with indignation disguised as disbelief. "This is absurd," she exclaimed, her voice laden with fury masqueraded as incredulity. "This recording could have been manipulated. We're talking about a child influenced by a resentful employee. There is no concrete evidence against me." James blinked, as if waking from a nightmare. His gaze wavered between Sarah and Victoria, confusion mixed with overwhelming shock. "Victoria," he murmured, his voice choked. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me this recording isn't real." Victoria let out a dry laugh, throwing her hands up in a dramatic gesture. "James, please, are you going to believe this? A child who has been isolated for months, clearly disturbed by grief? Anna, a woman who has always been against me. They're plotting against me, and you're falling for it like a fool." But Sarah did not back down. She clenched her fists at her sides and took a step forward. "If you don't believe me, then look at the restaurant reports, Dad," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "Anna took documents before being fired. She found out that Victoria was stealing from you all along. She diverted millions into accounts you didn't even know existed." Victoria's rage grew, the self-control she prided herself on maintaining beginning to crumble. "You're lying," she snarled, pointing her finger at the girl. "You're defaming me because you can't accept that your father has moved on." But James was no longer listening. His face was pale, his eyes shining with a mixture of pain and anger. With trembling steps, he crossed the room and picked up the documents that Anna had gathered, flipping through each page with an expression of absolute horror. Every transaction, every number that didn't make sense, every forged signature was there, laid bare. He felt his stomach churn, as if the entire ground had been ripped out from under his feet. "My God," James whispered, his fingers gripping the paper as if he could crush the truth. "All this time, you not only hurt my daughter, you robbed me, you manipulated me, you destroyed my family." Victoria saw that she was losing control of the situation, and then her mask finally cracked. Desperation invaded her gaze as she advanced towards James, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're a fool," she screamed, her voice shrill without any trace of the sweet, controlled woman she pretended to be. "You've always been weak, always been easy to deceive. Do you think you would have accomplished anything without me? I made you a respected man. I made you someone worthy in this rotten society." James slowly raised his eyes, and for the first time, Sarah saw something different in them, a contained anger, a disappointment so deep that it couldn't be undone. He clenched his fists at his sides, struggling to breathe. "You never did anything but destroy everything I touched," he said, his voice low and charged with emotion. "I loved you, Victoria, and you only used me." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the policeman beside her, who stepped forward. "Mrs. Gibbons, we have enough evidence to take you into custody," he declared firmly. "Anything else you say can be used against you in court." The woman turned, her eyes wide, as if she finally realized her fate was sealed. "No, I'm innocent. This is a setup." Her voice rose to an almost hysterical pitch as she tried to break free. "James, you can't let them take me. You know everything I did was for us." James said nothing. He only watched, his eyes empty as the officers handcuffed her and escorted her out of the house. Sarah stood still, her eyes glued to her stepmother, watching her being taken away for the first time without control of the situation. Victoria thrashed, screamed, but no one was listening anymore. Her reign had ended. The police van door slammed shut, muffling Victoria's hysterical screams as she still struggled uselessly against the handcuffs. The officers showed no reaction, accustomed to criminals trying to evade their punishments. The storm falling over the property seemed a reflection of the chaos that had taken over the mansion, and James, standing under the veranda, merely watched as everything crumbled around him. The chief investigator approached, holding a rain-soaked clipboard, and looked at James with a mixture of compassion and professionalism. "Mr. Gibbons, our team has already contacted other police stations and managed to link your wife," he paused, correcting himself, "Mrs. Victoria Gibbons, to a series of frauds and scams carried out in other states. 2 false identities were confirmed, in addition to records of previous marriages whose spouses died under suspicious circumstances. She was already being investigated in another case when we received the report about what happened here." James felt the impact of those words as if he had been punched in the chest. He had never known the real Victoria. The woman he had welcomed into his home, embraced as part of the family, was a criminal. Everything he had lived with her was a well-constructed lie. Every gesture calculated to lead him exactly where she wanted. He had spent years beside someone who, without hesitation, had tried to destroy his daughter and was still embezzling millions from his businesses. "My God," he muttered, his voice hoarse and heavy. "I was a fool." Sarah looked at her father, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. For so long she had begged him to see the truth, but now that he finally did, it was too late to fix everything that had been broken. Still, when James passed his hands over his face, exhausted and devastated, she felt a pang of empathy. He had also been a victim. The officer continued with his explanation, his voice firm but professional. "We'll take Mrs. Gibbons to the police station. With all the evidence collected, the prosecutor has already authorized her to be held without bail until the trial. Sarah's recordings will be attached to the case, along with the documents provided by Anna, and the irregularities found in the restaurant accounts. Given the connections to previous scams, she may face a severe sentence." James just nodded, unable to say anything. The words seemed useless in the face of the avalanche of emotions that took hold of his chest. His eyes followed the vehicle as it slowly drove away, the red and blue lights blinking against the wet ground. The tires skidded slightly in the mud before disappearing down the winding road, leaving behind a trail of marks that would soon be erased by the continuous rain. Just as Victoria's trail in their lives was finally beginning to disappear, the rain kept falling, heavy drops beating against the roof and running down the windows of the mansion. The sound, which had so often seemed an omen of difficult times, now carried something different. It was like a cleansing, as if each drop were washing away the invisible scars that house had carried for years. Sarah stood next to her father, watching the empty road. The wind swayed the trees, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the fear that had accompanied her for so long begin to dissolve. Not completely, not all at once, but enough for her to truly breathe. James wiped his face, exhausted, his shoulders tense as if carrying a burden he only now realized was unbearable. When he finally looked at his daughter, he found her gaze fixed on the horizon, lost between the raindrops and the painful memories. She seemed different. "It's over," he muttered, his voice hoarse, weighed down by fatigue. "She can't hurt you anymore." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She felt her chest rise and fall slowly, absorbing those words. They sounded right, but at the same time there was something she knew it would take time to fully accept. Victoria might be gone, but the marks she left wouldn't disappear so easily. "I know," she finally said without taking her eyes off the road, "but it still feels strange, as if at any moment she could come back." James crouched down to his daughter's height and held her small hands, holding her gaze. "She's never coming back, Sarah." His voice was firm, a silent vow, "and I will never let anything happen to you again." Sarah looked at him for a moment before nodding. For the first time, she saw in her father's gaze not only regret, but a real promise that he would be there, truly, from now on. She took a deep breath and looked at the mansion behind them. The house no longer seemed like a place of shadows. Now perhaps it could finally become a home. The courtroom was packed. Journalists occupied the front rows, cameras aimed at the woman in the dock, waiting for any reaction that could become the headline of the day. Victoria Gibbons maintained an upright posture, her hair impeccably styled, wearing a sober ensemble that contrasted with the cold and calculating expression on her face. She still believed she could get out of this situation. The judge entered the room and everyone stood up. Sarah, seated between James and Anna, felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard so many stories about justice, but never imagined she would be there, at the center of a trial that would define the fate of the woman who had ruined her life. When the judge authorized the prosecution to present the charges, Victoria remained impassive, as if none of it were real. The prosecutor, a woman with serious features and a firm voice, stood up and addressed the jury. "We are faced with a woman who for years manipulated and deceived those around her. We are not just talking about financial fraud or theft. We are talking about abuse, attempted murder, a child imprisoned in her own home. Today we will bring evidence that Victoria Gibbons not only defrauded millions of dollars, but also tried to eliminate any obstacle that could threaten her scheme." Victoria smiled sideways, shaking her head as if it were all ridiculous. When called to testify, her demeanor changed. She looked at the jury, sighing theatrically, before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, I am being framed," she said, her voice laden with false fragility. "For years I tried to care for a troubled girl, a child who never accepted my presence and was manipulated by resentful employees. Anna, for example. She was always jealous of me, and when she realized she couldn't bring me down, she decided to incriminate me." Anna, sitting on the witness stand, showed no reaction. She already expected Victoria to try to drag others down with her. The judge banged his gavel, calling for attention. "Mrs. Gibbons, are you alleging that you were the victim of a conspiracy?" Victoria nodded slowly, leaning forward slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. Since the tragic death of Sarah's mother, I did everything I could to fill that void. But she always showed unstable behavior, and I believe that was exploited by people who wanted my ruin." Sarah clenched her fists, feeling the anger grow inside her. How could Victoria still pretend like that? How could she invert the roles, trying to appear the victim? But this time, it wouldn't work. This time, the truth was against her. Sarah took a deep breath before standing up. She felt the weight of the stairs upon her as she walked to the witness stand. The courtroom was silent, awaiting every word that came out of her mouth. She sat down, her small hands clasped in her lap, and looked at the judge. Her eyes briefly met Victoria's, who was watching her with a neutral expression, but her lips were pursed. She still thought she could win. The prosecutor approached and spoke gently. "Sarah, can you tell us in your own words what happened while you were living with Victoria?" The girl moistened her lips, feeling a knot in her throat. But she was no longer the frightened child who huddled in the basement. She lifted her chin and answered firmly. "She locked me in the basement for days. I stayed in the dark with little food. She did that when my father traveled and threatened me not to tell anyone. Some people in the audience sighed, murmuring quietly among themselves. Victoria rolled her eyes, leaning forward. "That's an exaggeration," she said, her voice laden with false indignation. "Sarah has always had emotional crises and sometimes needed to be disciplined. There was never any abuse." The judge struck the gavel against the wood, calling for attention. "The defendant will remain silent until authorized to speak." Sarah felt the anger grow inside her, but remained calm. She looked at the prosecutor and continued, "I knew no one would believe me, so I recorded everything. On my phone, there's her voice saying she needed to get rid of me. She also talked about my mother. She said it was a perfect accident." The prosecutor nodded and looked at the judge. "I would like to present the recordings as evidence." The judge gave an affirmative nod, and the recording was played. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Victoria's cold voice echoed through the speakers. "A stumble on the stairs, an electric shock, a gas leak. Just make sure it's quick and no one suspects anything." James, sitting in the front row, closed his eyes, absorbing the pain of each word. He had loved a monster. Victoria finally lost control. "This proves nothing," she shouted, her voice trembling with desperation. "That recording could have been edited. That girl has always been manipulative. She wants to incriminate me because she hates me." The prosecutor merely smiled. "And we also have the financial embezzlements. Do you want to deny that too?" Victoria felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. For the first time, she realized she had no way out. This time, the truth had won. The courtroom remained silent as the judge reviewed the evidence presented. The atmosphere was charged with tension, each person holding their breath as they awaited the verdict. Victoria, seated on the defendant's bench, was still trying to maintain her composure, but the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed the panic she tried to hide. She knew she was cornered. The judge struck the gavel against the wood and looked directly at the defendant. "Victoria Gibbons, the evidence presented in this court demonstrates, without a shadow of a doubt, that you committed a series of serious crimes, including child abuse, financial fraud, and attempted homicide. Furthermore, there is strong evidence of your involvement in the death of Mrs. Carol Gibbons, which will be re-examined in light of the new evidence. In view of this jury finds you guilty of all charges." Victoria gasped, her expression finally breaking into pure despair. "This is a mistake," she shouted, suddenly rising. "I've been framed. None of this is real. James, for God's sake, say something." James remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the table before him. He couldn't look at Victoria, not after everything he had heard. He had believed her, trusted her, allowed her into his daughter's life, and watched her destroy everything around her. There was nothing left to say. The judge ignored the defendant's protests and continued, his voice firm and unwavering. "Given the gravity of the crimes committed, this court sentences Victoria Gibbons to the maximum prison sentence without the possibility of bail. The process of reopening the investigation into the death of Carol Gibbons will be conducted in parallel, considering the new evidence of possible premeditation." The final words fell like a crushing weight upon Victoria. She whirled sharply towards the defense attorney, who merely lowered his head, already knowing there were no more appeals or arguments that could save her. "No, this can't be happening." She tried to break free from the guards who were already approaching, the handcuffs being locked around her wrists. "James, look at me. I did this for us. Everything I did was for our future." James finally raised his eyes, but there was no more love, compassion, or doubt in his expression, only emptiness and regret. The man who had once allowed Victoria into his life, who had believed her lies and given her his trust, now saw only a stranger before him. The veil of illusion had fallen, revealing the true woman who had manipulated his family for so long and destroyed everything around her. Her gaze was cold, calculating, and even in that moment about to be taken away, she was still trying to find a way to escape. But there were no more exits. James leaned forward slightly, his voice coming out low, laden with a certainty he had never had before. "The only future you deserve," he murmured, "is behind bars, just like you did to my daughter." Victoria's eyes widened, her lips parting, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed truly out of control of the situation. She tried to hold James's gaze, to search for any hint of hesitation, but found only an impassable wall of contempt. The man she had deceived for years was gone. The police officers approached, grabbing her arms, and pulled her towards the exit. The handcuffs jingled on her slender wrists as she struggled slightly, as if she still couldn't believe this was really happening. The echo of the officers' firm footsteps filled the courtroom, muffling the murmurs of the audience, who watched the scene with watchful eyes. Sarah remained motionless, her fingers slightly trembling, but never averting her gaze. She needed to see. She needed to etch in her memory the exact moment when Victoria left her life forever. Each step the woman took was a reminder of everything she had endured, the days of hunger in the basement, the constant fear, the feeling of helplessness. But now, as she watched her being led away, a new emotion took hold of Sarah. Freedom. Victoria turned one last time, her eyes fixed on the girl, her lips contorted into a bitter smile, a remnant of the manipulative woman she had once been. "Enjoy it while you can, little girl," she muttered, her voice laced with venom. Sarah didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid. "I already am," she responded, her voice firm, unwavering. Victoria opened her mouth to retort, but one of the officers pulled her, forcing her to keep walking. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. Sarah released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The woman who had made her suffer so much was finally paying for her crimes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt she could truly breathe. The morning sun illuminated the cozy room, bringing a soft warmth that Sarah had not felt in a long time. Seated on the soft sofa, she looked at the therapist in front of her, trying to find the right words to describe everything she felt. The past few weeks had been intense, loaded with revelations and changes that seemed like a hurricane sweeping everything in their path. Now, for the first time, she had the chance to breathe and understand everything she had experienced. The therapist, a woman with a serene expression and a welcoming voice, smiled slightly. "You're safe now, Sarah. The worst is over. But I know it must still be hard to get it all out." The girl played with her fingers on her lap, hesitant. "I still have nightmares about her," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "Sometimes I feel like she's still around, like she's going to show up suddenly and lock me up again." The therapist nodded, keeping calm. "That's part of the trauma, and it takes time for your mind to understand that it's all over. But you're no longer alone. Now you have people around you to support you." The judge gave an affirmative nod, and the recording was played. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Victoria's cold voice echoed through the speakers. "A stumble on the stairs, an electric shock, a gas leak. Just make sure it's quick, and no one suspects anything." James, sitting in the front row, closed his eyes, absorbing the pain of each word. He had loved a monster. Victoria finally lost control. "This proves nothing," she shouted, her voice trembling with desperation. "That recording could have been edited. That girl has always been manipulative. She wants to incriminate me because she hates me." The prosecutor merely smiled. "And we also have the financial embezzlements. Do you want to deny that too?" Victoria felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. For the first time, she realized she had no way out. This time, the truth had won. The courtroom remained silent as the judge reviewed the evidence presented. The atmosphere was charged with tension, each person holding their breath as they awaited the verdict. Victoria, seated on the defendant's bench, was still trying to maintain her composure, but the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed the panic she tried to hide. She knew she was cornered. The judge struck the gavel against the wood and looked directly at the defendant. "Victoria Gibbons, the evidence presented in this court demonstrates, without a shadow of a doubt, that you committed a series of serious crimes, including child abuse, financial fraud, and attempted homicide. Furthermore, there is strong evidence of your involvement in the death of Mrs. Carol Gibbons, which will be re-examined in light of the new evidence. In view of this jury finds you guilty of all charges." Victoria gasped, her expression finally breaking into pure despair. "This is a mistake," she shouted, suddenly rising. "I've been framed. None of this is real. James, for God's sake, say something." James remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the table before him. He couldn't look at Victoria, not after everything he had heard. He had believed her, trusted her, allowed her into his daughter's life, and watched her destroy everything around her. There was nothing left to say. The judge ignored the defendant's protests and continued, his voice firm and unwavering. Given the gravity of the crimes committed, this court sentences Victoria Gibbons to the maximum prison sentence without the possibility of bail. The process of reopening the investigation into the death of Carol Gibbons will be conducted in parallel, considering the new evidence of possible premeditation. The final words fell like a crushing weight upon Victoria. She whirled sharply towards the defense attorney, who merely lowered his head, already knowing there were no more appeals or arguments that could save her. No, this can't be happening. She tried to break free from the guards who were already approaching, the handcuffs being locked around her wrists. James, look at me. I did this for us. Everything I did was for our future. James finally raised his eyes, but there was no more love, compassion, or doubt in his expression, only emptiness and regret. The man who had once allowed Victoria into his life, who had believed her lies and given her his trust, now saw only a stranger before him. The veil of illusion had fallen, revealing the true woman who had manipulated his family for so long and destroyed everything around her. Her gaze was cold, calculating, and even in that moment about to be taken away, she was still trying to find a way to escape. But there were no more exits. James leaned forward slightly, his voice coming out low, laden with a certainty he had never had before. "The only future you deserve," he murmured, "is behind bars, just like you did to my daughter." Victoria's eyes widened, her lips parting, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed truly out of control of the situation. She tried to hold James's gaze, to search for any hint of hesitation, but found only an impassable wall of contempt. The man she had deceived for years was gone. The police officers approached, grabbing her arms, and pulled her towards the exit. The handcuffs jingled on her slender wrists as she struggled slightly, as if she still couldn't believe this was really happening. The echo of the officers' firm footsteps filled the courtroom, muffling the murmurs of the audience, who watched the scene with watchful eyes. Sarah remained motionless, her fingers slightly trembling, but never averting her gaze. She needed to see. She needed to etch in her memory the exact moment when Victoria left her life forever. Each step the woman took was a reminder of everything she had endured, the days of hunger in the basement, the constant fear, the feeling of helplessness. But now, as she watched her being led away, a new emotion took hold of Sarah. Freedom. Victoria turned one last time, her eyes fixed on the girl, her lips contorted into a bitter smile, a remnant of the manipulative woman she had once been. "Enjoy it while you can, little girl," she muttered, her voice laced with venom. Sarah didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid. "I already am," she responded, her voice firm, unwavering. Victoria opened her mouth to retort, but one of the officers pulled her, forcing her to keep walking. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. Sarah released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The woman who had made her suffer so much was finally paying for her crimes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt she could truly breathe. The morning sun illuminated the cozy room, bringing a soft warmth that Sarah had not felt in a long time. Seated on the soft sofa, she looked at the therapist in front of her, trying to find the right words to describe everything she felt. The past few weeks had been intense, loaded with revelations and changes that seemed like a hurricane sweeping everything in their path. Now, for the first time, she had the chance to breathe and understand everything she had experienced. The therapist, a woman with a serene expression and a welcoming voice, smiled slightly. "You're safe now, Sarah. The worst is over, but I know it must still be hard to get it all out." The girl played with her fingers, and the judge gave an affirmative nod, and the recording was played. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Victoria's cold voice echoed through the speakers. A stumble on the stairs, an electric shock, a gas leak. Just make sure it's quick and no one suspects anything. James, sitting in the front row, closed his eyes, absorbing the pain of each word. He had loved a monster. Victoria finally lost control. "This proves nothing," she shouted, her voice trembling with desperation. "That recording could have been edited. That girl has always been manipulative. She wants to incriminate me because she hates me." The prosecutor merely smiled. "And we also have the financial embezzlements. Do you want to deny that too?" Victoria felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. For the first time, she realized she had no way out. This time, The truth had won. The courtroom remained silent as the judge reviewed the evidence presented. The atmosphere was charged with tension, each person holding their breath as they awaited the verdict. Victoria, seated on the defendant's bench, was still trying to maintain her composure, but the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed the panic she tried to hide. She knew she was cornered. The judge struck the gavel against the wood and looked directly at the defendant. Victoria Gibbons, the evidence presented in this court demonstrates, without a shadow of a doubt, that you committed a series of serious crimes, including child abuse, financial fraud, and attempted homicide. Furthermore, there is strong evidence of your involvement in the death of Mrs. Carol Gibbons, which will be re-examined in light of the new evidence. In view of this jury finds you guilty of all charges. Victoria gasped, her expression finally breaking into pure despair. "This is a mistake," she shouted, suddenly rising. "I've been framed. None of this is real. James, for God's sake, say something." James remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the table before him. He couldn't look at Victoria, not after everything he had heard. He had believed her, trusted her, allowed her into his daughter's life, and watched her destroy everything around her. There was nothing left to say. The judge ignored the defendant's protests and continued, his voice firm and unwavering. "Given the gravity of the crimes committed, this court sentences Victoria Gibbons to the maximum prison sentence without the possibility of bail. The process of reopening the investigation into the death of Carol Gibbons will be conducted in parallel, considering the new evidence of possible premeditation." The final words fell like a crushing weight upon Victoria. She whirled sharply towards the defense attorney, who merely lowered his head, already knowing there were no more appeals or arguments that could save her. "No, this can't be happening." She tried to break free from the guards who were already approaching, the handcuffs being locked around her wrists. "James, look at me. I did this for us. Everything I did was for our future." James finally raised his eyes, but there was no more love, compassion, or doubt in his expression, only emptiness and regret. The man who had once allowed Victoria into his life, who had believed her lies and given her his trust, now saw only a stranger before him. The veil of illusion had fallen, revealing the true woman who had manipulated his family for so long and destroyed everything around her. Her gaze was cold, calculating, and even in that moment about to be taken away, she was still trying to find a way to escape. But there were no more exits. James leaned forward slightly, his voice coming out low, laden with a certainty he had never had before. "The only future you deserve," he murmured, "is behind bars, just like you did to my daughter." Victoria's eyes widened, her lips parting, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed truly out of control of the situation. She tried to hold James's gaze, to search for any hint of hesitation, but found only an impassable wall of contempt. The man she had deceived for years was gone. The police officers approached, grabbing her arms, and pulled her towards the exit. The handcuffs jingled on her slender wrists as she struggled slightly, as if she still couldn't believe this was really happening. The echo of the officers' firm footsteps filled the courtroom, muffling the murmurs of the audience, who watched the scene with watchful eyes. Sarah remained motionless, her fingers slightly trembling, but never averting her gaze. She needed to see. She needed to etch in her memory the exact moment when Victoria left her life forever. Each step the woman took was a reminder of everything she had endured, the days of hunger in the basement, the constant fear, the feeling of helplessness. But now, as she watched her being led away, a new emotion took hold of Sarah. Freedom. Victoria turned one last time, her eyes fixed on the girl, her lips contorted into a bitter smile, a remnant of the manipulative woman she had once been. "Enjoy it while you can, little girl," she muttered, her voice laced with venom. Sarah didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid. "I already am," she responded, her voice firm, unwavering. Victoria opened her mouth to retort, but one of the officers pulled her, forcing her to keep walking. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate. Sarah released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The woman who had made her suffer so much was finally paying for her crimes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt she could truly breathe. The morning sun illuminated the cozy room, bringing a soft warmth that Sarah had not felt in a long time. Seated on the soft sofa, She looked at the therapist in front of her, trying to find the right words to describe everything she felt. The past few weeks had been intense, loaded with revelations and changes that seemed like a hurricane sweeping everything in their path. Now, for the first time, she had the chance to breathe and understand everything she had experienced. The therapist, a woman with a serene expression and a welcoming voice, smiled slightly. "You're safe now, Sarah. The worst is over, but I know it must still be hard to get it all out." The girl played with her fingers on her lap, hesitant. "I still have nightmares about her," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "Sometimes I feel like she's still around, like she's going to show up suddenly and lock me up again." The therapist leaned forward, her eyes kind. "I know it's hard to shake that feeling, but there are so many people on your side who will make sure nothing like that ever happens again." Sarah took a deep breath, letting the truth of those words settle inside her. She wasn't alone. Never again would she be. That same afternoon, James awaited her on the porch of the renovated mansion. Since Victoria's imprisonment, he had tried to rebuild everything that had been destroyed, not only the house but the relationship with his daughter. When Sarah arrived, he smiled slightly, but there was a weight in his gaze. There was something that needed to be said. "Sarah," he began, his voice laden with emotion, "I know a simple apology isn't enough for everything that happened. I should have seen, I should have protected you. But instead, I let myself be deceived." He sighed, lowering his gaze for a moment before looking at her again. "I failed you, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for that." The girl remained silent for a moment before approaching. She looked at her father, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes, and then gently held his hand. "You didn't believe before, but you believe now," she said softly, "and that means something." James felt a lump in his throat as he held Sarah's small hand. He didn't deserve her forgiveness, but he would do everything to regain her trust. Anna returned to work at the restaurant days later, bringing back the energy the place seemed to have lost. When Sarah visited her, she saw the kitchen full of life again and knew that, somehow, everyone was trying to start over. And that was the beginning of a new story. The sound of hammers and saws echoed through the property as workers moved from one side to the other, carrying boards, removing old furniture, and tearing down what no longer belonged to that house. Sarah watched it all from the porch, feeling a mixture of relief and hope as she saw the changes happening. The mansion that had once been a place of pain and fear was now being rebuilt, and with it, her family was also being rebuilt. James approached and gently placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, following her gaze to the workers removing the debris from the basement. "I don't want anything from this place to remain here," he said, his voice charged with emotion. "I should have realized before I should have protected you, and your mother. But now at least I can ensure that no trace of what Victoria did will remain standing." Sarah looked at her father, feeling that for the first time his words came not only from remorse, but from a true determination to change. They watched together as the workers removed the last rotten boards from the basement entrance before starting to fill the hole with concrete. The place where so many tears had been shed would no longer exist. Over the days, each room of the house began to come to life again. The dark wallpapers were replaced with soft colors, heavy furniture gave way to a cozier environment, and every corner that had once carried shadows was now illuminated by open windows. Sarah felt the difference in every detail, as if little by little she could breathe better, as if that house was finally becoming a real home. That night, James called Sarah to the garden, where a small memorial had been set up. A shiny metal plaque gleamed in the soft light of the porch, and beside it, freshly planted flowers filled the space with a light scent. Sarah approached slowly, her eyes watering as she read the words engraved on the plaque. "In memory of Carol Gibbons, a loving mother and devoted wife, her love lives on in every memory." James cleared his throat, visibly emotional. "She loved this garden," he said, looking at the flowers they had planted together. "She always talked about how she wanted it to be a place of peace, where we could sit and talk. I think, in some way, we're fulfilling her wish." Sarah ran her fingers along the edge of the plaque and took a deep breath. "I miss her," she murmured, letting the longing fill her chest. "But I think now she can finally rest." James nodded, holding his daughter's hand. They couldn't change the past, but they were ready to build a different future. A year had passed since the day of the trial. Time, which had once seemed to drag on in the midst of fear and uncertainty, now flowed with the smoothness of a rebuilt life. Sarah walked through the renovated garden of the mansion, feeling the scent of the flowers she and James had planted together. The sun shone brightly in the sky, reflecting the new chapter they were both writing after so much suffering. Inside the house, James finished organizing the papers on the table, making sure everything was in place before leaving. His professional life had changed drastically since he discovered Victoria's misappropriations, and he made sure to regain control of his business with his own hands. But more than that, there was something far more important to him now: his daughter. Sarah entered the room and leaned against the doorframe, watching her father for a moment before speaking. "So, have you seen the news?" she asked, her voice light, but with an implicit weight. James sighed and nodded, pushing the papers aside before facing her. "Yes, conviction confirmed. Life imprisonment with no possibility of appeal," he said, without any emotion in his voice. "It's finally over." Sarah walked over to the couch and sat down beside him, absorbing the impact of the words. Finally it was over. Victoria would have no more chances to escape, to lie, to manipulate. Justice had been served, and now for the first time Sarah felt truly free. "Do you think she feels anything? Any remorse?" she asked, looking at her father. James was silent for a moment, pondering. "I don't think so. People like Victoria don't feel remorse. They only miss the control they lost." The girl nodded as if she already knew the answer before even asking. She didn't want Victoria to suffer. She just wanted her to never again have the power to hurt anyone. That night, father and daughter dined together in the new dining room, now renovated and free from the ghosts of the past. The soft lighting spread a cozy glow throughout the space, reflecting off the newly restored furniture and the large polished wooden table where carefully arranged plates awaited them. The scent of homemade food lingered in the air, an aroma that recalled simpler times before everything fell apart. It was an ordinary dinner for any other family, but for them, it was a symbol of a fresh start. Anna had stopped by earlier, bringing a freshly baked cake, still warm, that had left a sweet fragrance throughout the kitchen. "It's a gift for the little warrior," she had said, winking at Sarah before leaving. The girl smiled at the memory, feeling a gentle warmth in her chest as she saw the carefully decorated cake in the center of the table. It was just a gesture, but it carried a profound meaning, the kind of affection that had been denied to her for so long. James watched his daughter chew slowly, her gaze lost for a moment. He was still trying to understand how that little being before him had endured so much. How had Sarah managed to survive the terror that he, for so long, had been unable to see? The guilt consumed him, but now more than anything he wanted to be the father she deserved. "Are you enjoying the food?" he asked, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. Sarah raised her eyes to him and nodded, wiping her lips with a napkin. "It's very good. Better than anything I used to eat before," she said, without needing to mention the days when only stale bread and dirty water were given to her. James swallowed hard, realizing the depth of what she had just said. He gripped his utensils for a moment before forcing a smile. "We'll make sure that from now on you only have the best." The dinner continued with light conversations, old memories, and some genuine laughter. The atmosphere was different. There was no more fear, no more secrets, only the reconstruction of a bond that had almost been destroyed. When they finished, James watched Sarah for a moment, his gaze full of pride. After everything she had been through, she was still there, strong, determined, ready to move forward. "You are the strongest girl I've ever met," he said, his voice full of sincerity. Sarah smiled, feeling her chest warm. "I had to be," she replied, taking her juice glass and raising it slightly. "A toast to freedom," James laughed, picking up his own glass and gently tapping it against hers. "To freedom," he repeated, knowing that after everything, the most important thing was what still lay ahead. The metallic sound of the cell door closing echoed through the prison corridors, marking the beginning of what would be Victoria Gibbons' new reality. The grey walls, the smell of sweat and disinfectant mixed together, the constant sound of voices and heavy footsteps. Everything seemed suffocating, overwhelming. She who once lived in a luxurious mansion was now just another prisoner among many. The first shock came on the very first day. After going through the standard procedure, changing clothes, having belongings removed, Cutting the long hair she was so proud of, she was escorted to the women's wing of the penitentiary. The older inmates watched her with interest, some whispering among themselves, others laughing quietly. Victoria tried to ignore them, raised her chin with arrogance, but it didn't take long for her to realize that inside, her haughty posture meant nothing. As soon as she was assigned to a collective cell, she found her new home, a small space with narrow bunk beds and a bathroom without a door. The other inmates analyzed her for a few moments, before one of them, a muscular woman with tattoos running up her arms, let out a mocking laugh. "Look who's here," she muttered, crossing her arms. "The socialite killer." Victoria kept her expression impassive, refusing to react. She knew that any display of weakness in that place would be fatal. But the women there didn't need words to detect fear. They could sense it. At the first meal in the cafeteria, Victoria tried to sit alone in a corner, away from the others. However, before she could take the first spoonful of the flavorless food, she felt a rough pull on her shoulder. Her body was violently thrown backwards, and the tray fell to the floor. "There are no privileges here, madame," said a blonde inmate, her eyes cold. "You sit where we tell you." The cafeteria erupted in laughter as Victoria recomposed herself, feeling the humiliation rise like a hot poison through her veins. Her instinct screamed to react, to fight, but she knew that inside she was the prey, not the predator. The following weeks were a real nightmare. The cell was a hostile environment where each day was a battle for respect. The other inmates loved to remind her of her crimes, whispering about how she had tortured a child, how she had tried to kill her own husband's daughter. Victoria tried to ignore them, maintain her poise, but it was impossible to pretend that those words didn't affect her. One night, in the dark and smelly bathroom of the penitentiary, she felt a strong push and her body slammed against the cold wall. The shock ran down her spine, and when she tried to turn around, she saw a tall woman with a grim expression, staring at her with a cruel smile. "Not even among us is there forgiveness for those who hurt children," she hissed, her eyes flashing with contempt. "And you know what I heard? That you caged the girl, like an animal." Victoria swallowed hard, feeling panic rising in her throat. But the inmate didn't stop. She moved closer, her hot, sour breath against Victoria's skin. "And now look at you," she mocked, pointing to the filthy cell next door. "Who's the caged animal now?" The cruel laughter of the other inmates echoed down the corridor as Victoria shrugged her shoulders, feeling the weight of destiny's revenge on her skin. Now, it was she who lived caged. Time passed, and Victoria realized that the penitentiary was a new version of hell. Her life was reduced to following orders, eating scraps, sleeping little, and above all, facing the contempt of everyone around her. Her tricks and manipulations no longer had any effect. One night, while she was in line for the shower, one of the most feared inmates in the block approached, a robust woman, her skin marked by scars. "They say you were a great lady out there," she muttered, crossing her arms. "But in here you're nothing but a rat." Victoria narrowed her eyes, her pride still struggling against reality. "I'm not like you," she retorted, keeping her voice steady. The woman laughed loudly, and soon others around her also laughed. "Isn't that just like us?" she repeated, approaching. "Funny, because I remember seeing your face on every newspaper, saying you robbed, killed, and tried to make an 8-year-old girl disappear." The laughter faded from her face, and her eyes hardened. "I did bad things, yes, but I never touched a child. You, madame, are at the bottom of the pit." Before Victoria could respond, she felt the violent push. Her body slammed against the cold wall of the corridor, and laughter echoed around her. No guard intervened, no voice rose to help her. In there she was alone. Over the months, the former socialite lost her shine, her arrogant posture, and even the will to fight. Her well-manicured nails turned into brittle pieces, her once impeccable hair now a disheveled mess. The nights were long, the days endless, and each meal came with the fear of someone spitting in her food. She was no longer the powerful Victoria Gibbons. The following week, she received her final sentence. The case of Carol Gibbons' death had been reopened, and with the new evidence, it was proven that Victoria had sabotaged James's wife's car. It had been a premeditated murder. Her sentence was extended, and the chance of any appeal was denied. Life imprisonment. When she returned to her cell that night, she sat in the corner hugging her knees. The thin mattress beneath her smelled of sweat and mold, and the dampness of the cold wall penetrated her skin. The sound of footsteps echoed down the concrete hallway, mixed with the hoarse voices of the other inmates who were still talking, some laughing, others arguing over trivial matters. But Victoria paid no attention to any of this. She just kept her eyes fixed on the dirty floor, feeling trapped not only by the prison walls, but by the very ruin she had created. She would never leave there. She would never step on a soft carpet, never smell her expensive perfume, never again deceive a rich man to get what she wanted. The life she had built with lies, manipulation, and power had crumbled before her, and all that was left was the sticky filth of the cell floor and the cruel gaze of the inmates surrounding her. On the bed next to her, a woman with unkempt hair and skin marked by scars let out a low, mocking laugh. She had been watching Victoria for days, waiting for the right moment to attack with sharp words, and now seemed pleased to see Victoria in that pathetic state. "Thinking about what you lost, madame?" she taunted, her tone laced with irony. She threw a piece of stale bread on the floor, her eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Must be hard, huh? Trading expensive wines for this crap they call food." Victoria remained silent, clutching her knees to her chest. Responding would be useless. There was nothing she could say to restore her position, to regain the respect she once effortlessly commanded. Here, she was nobody. The inmate leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You know, I've seen a few rich ones like you pass through here. They all arrive with that air of superiority, thinking they're better than us." She paused before letting out another laugh. "But in here, no one cares about what you were out there. In here, you're just another convict." Victoria's silence only encouraged more taunts. Another woman, lying on the lower bunk, let out a short laugh. "I was told you caged a child," she mumbled, her voice slurred. "Now that's disgusting." "In here, no one feels sorry for people like you." Victoria's stomach turned. For the first time in her life, she felt true fear. It wasn't just the fear of prison, of cramped cells, or inedible food. It was the fear of realizing that there was no one to defend her. No influence, no power, no lie that could get her out of there. She didn't respond. She just lowered her head, letting the darkness of the cell engulf her. She would never again have power over anyone. Did you enjoy Sarah and Anna's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and check out the next one waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.